Well, good morning, everyone. And Cynthia, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. I want to thank everybody for making the trip here. I know Susan said, welcome to hometown of Jacksonville, but this is a statewide summit, and we have people live streaming from all over. And I know some of you flew in from other states because you've heard what's going on in Florida. And I just want to welcome you to this movement that we started several years ago. And as your president of the Florida Chamber Foundation, I just want to set things up for the rest of the day. I've had a chance to meet most of the presenters, and I can tell you unequivocally there's not another state-level business-led conversation about prosperity and how to cut childhood poverty in half in the country, let alone one where you're going to hear from the quality of speakers that you have today. And I want to right up front be so bold as to define what I mean by quality. We're not going to put speakers in front of you who read about this somewhere and are sharing with you what they heard. You're going to hear from people who are actually doing this stuff in the trenches. And that's what makes this so special, is this isn't just a concept and a goal. This is actually something that's happening in zip codes and through local chambers of commerce all over Florida. So with that said, again, I want to officially welcome you. What I want to do in the brief time that I have with you this morning as we kick things off is I want to start at sort of the 100,000-foot view of how Florida's doing, because we're all Floridians, and we can't solve this if we don't understand where our state's going and if we're not on the same page with the connection to, say, job creation, social determinants of health, and what's happening with early learning. It's all related, and I think we all know that. But I want to spend a few slides going through just big picture. How's Florida doing? Where are we going? And then I want to zone in on the specifics of this prosperity initiative and what specifically is happening, and go all the way down to the zip code level, so that throughout the rest of the day, my charge to all of you is to be thinking, what can be done back home in the zip code? Who's not part of this yet? What more could your Chamber of Commerce be doing? Or what more could you be doing with your county? How could everybody be working together, whether it's United Way or Federal Reserve or our Lyft partners, right? We're all really in this together. And so I just today is all about how can we keep moving the needle forward on Florida. So right out of the box, I think everyone knows we do a statewide summit at the Florida Chamber Foundation every single month. And this is our annual summit on prosperity. We had one last month on transportation, growth and infrastructure, energy, water. We have one next month on all things education and workforce related, from early learning to lifelong learning. And I could go on, but this is our annual conference on how are we doing on prosperity. All of our conferences and all of our initiatives are all about one thing, and it's about Florida reaching its potential and Florida being the national example. And this is called the Florida 2030 Blueprint. And I just want to give you a quick update on where we are. So remember, this is the state strategic plan that the business community put together a couple years ago, and it goes out to 2030. So here's what it means. Here are the numbers that you're looking at. If Florida was a country, all right, if you haven't heard this before, if Florida was a country, we would be the 16th largest economy on the planet. Our economy is bigger than Saudi Arabia, and next year we'll pass Mexico to be number 15 in the world. We're on our path to number 10 by 2030, which is South Korea. I say that right out of the box because then the research started, and the research said, what would Florida have to do to be 10th in the world? Two of the goals, and I'm going to get to it in a minute, two of the goals are what we have to talk about today. We can't become the 10th largest economy in the world if we don't cut childhood poverty in half, and if we don't have 100% of our third graders reading at or above grade level by 2030, right? So again, this all connects together in the right kind of growth for Florida. That's what those 39 goals are about. And then you see the numbers at the bottom there. I just want to give you some context for where we are. So Florida will add another 2.9 million people by 2030. We're at 22.7 million right now, right? And we're adding about 1,000 people a day. So I'm going to show you a slide in a few minutes that shows childhood poverty in Florida has been going down ever since we started this initiative, but the population's been going up. Those two things are a good thing. This 1.4 million, that's how many new jobs have to be created by the private sector between now and 2030? What if your businesses and people that you work with could make a front-end decision to create some of those jobs in these zip codes where we have higher unemployment, where there's people who want to work, but maybe they just need job skills, right? The third and fourth bullet points here, 40 million, we're gonna have 40 million more visitors to Florida by 2030, and that's on top of record tourism that we saw over the last year. And then we're gonna have 2.5 million more drivers on our roads by now in 2030. So the reason we do these conferences is to say, look, everything's related, from early learning to childhood poverty to transportation to insurance costs to litigation and regulation. That's in a nutshell what we're working on. I mentioned there were 39 goals. I just simply wanted to put a box around these two so that you could see what we're talking about. Cutting childhood poverty in half and 100% of third graders reading at grade level by the time we get to 2030. I see a bunch of people taking pictures of these slides. These are all your slides. They're downloadable. Take as many pictures as you want to, but these are your slides, and we hope you'll go back home. And Josh, I know you show these at Citrus County Chamber meetings, so hopefully we can get 66 other counties to do the same thing. The FloridaScorecard.org, this is where you can learn an awful lot about what's going on statewide, what's going on at the county level. And I just simply wanted to acknowledge here that we have a lot more open jobs in Florida right now than we have people looking for work. As a matter of fact, statewide, for every 100 open jobs that we only have 61 people looking for work. But to localize this, and you can find all this for your county at the Florida Scorecard, but here in Duval County, there's only 39 people looking for a job for every 100 open jobs that exist. If ever there was a time to have this conversation about bringing economic opportunity into the zip codes where it hasn't been before, it's over the next 10 years. And so I don't know what else I can do to point that opportunity out. Now, having said that, consumer sentiment is going down, home sales are going down, so we have our eye on where's the economy going. I mentioned Florida's GDP, and I think what's important to know is we've grown over the last 4 years at over 14% in GDP terms. There's no other big state in the country, Texas, California, Illinois, New York, nobody has seen the growth that Florida has. Florida's grown at twice the growth of the national average. Speaking of growth, I want you to think about the IRS, and I want you to think about tax returns. And the IRS puts a report together that we access that shows money leaving, think W-2 income leaving one state and going to another. And we get an annual report of what's happening. What are these patterns? Folks, only 2 states have we lost revenue income to, and that's, you can see them on here. You got Tennessee and Wyoming. Every other state in the country, we have more income moving to Florida than away from it. And I want to make the point here. The number's so big, it's almost $40 billion. It's so big that we have to measure it by the hour for it to even be comprehensible. So it's you can see the number there, almost $4.5 million an hour of income is moving into Florida 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, holidays included. Now, that's 3.5 times our second place competitor, which is Texas. New York is losing a couple $1 million an hour. We're adding 4.5 million. The picture that I hope we see here is Florida's got an awful lot of things going right. Our economy's growing. We're diversifying our economy in almost any way you would want to measure that. Florida has a lot of things going right. If you've been paying attention to the national news over the last 3 or 4 days, you've seen some of these stats. We've been on CNN, Fox, and several other places with this information. Most people don't know, Florida now leads the United States in new business startups, right? So we passed California to take that spot in the last 6 months. So we literally are creating more new businesses in our state than any other state in the country. But who are these businesses, right? This is also probably what you've seen on CNN and Fox the last couple of days. Florida has more black-owned businesses with employees than any other state in the country. We're number 2 on Hispanic-owned businesses, and we're number 2 on women-owned businesses, right? This is absolutely something to celebrate, and it's something no one knows. So welcome to Florida, where we're doing all of these things that nobody knows about. So part of my role up here is to just put all this information right up in front of us, okay? So what I've shared with you so far, you would expect to hear from a Chamber of Commerce president, right? Like, look at all these things that are going right. Now what I want to do in the balance of my time up here this morning is take this from this 100,000-foot view down to, so what are we talking about with our Equality of Opportunity initiative, and what could we really make progress on today? So if you look at this slide, you'll notice two things are true at the same time. And I want you to read this. I want you to think about this, because most C-suite leaders that I talk to that see a slide like this are like, how could both things be true? We're creating 1 out of every 11 new jobs in the United States right here in Florida. But at the exact same time, we have over 770,000 kids, 763,000 kids that are living in poverty. So it's like, how are both of these things possible? And part of our job is to put this on the table for everybody to see, because I'm going to tell you what I told you last year. In my opinion, something that separates Florida's business leaders apart from others is that when business leaders see this information, they can't unsee it. And they then want to keep peeling back the onion a little bit more. Tell me more. What can we do about this? And I think we have a choice to make. A lot of times we think, hey, why isn't someone doing something about this? One of my favorite topics is third grade reading scores. I love going into a community, and I love asking a group of business leaders, what percentage of your third graders in this community can read at or above grade level? Most people tell me 92, 94, 98. Most people think it's close to 100%. When I tell them that in a community like this, it's less than 50%, the first thing that happens is people don't believe it. Well, that can't be true because the school board would never allow that. That can't be true because the principals wouldn't allow that. That couldn't be true because the parents wouldn't allow that. Folks, I'm not here to blame anybody for it. If anything, we need to blame ourselves, the business community. We now have tools where we can, like a physician, we can actually see what's going on with the patient, what's going on with a zip code, what's going on with a county, what's going on with a school. We now have no excuse to not go into that community and say, now we know where the needs are. So how can we direct our philanthropy there? How can we direct our volunteer hours there? How can we direct the nonprofits that we're on the board of or funding to say, hey, are we doing anything in those zip codes and on the health issue or on the crime issue or on the job training issue? Okay? I'm only here, all I'm trying to do is to get us to see there's a map for all of this, and we now have tools in Florida that no other state has. So, this prosperity issue, right? 983 zip codes in Florida with people living in them. There's 1,471 if you want to go fact check it, but like Amazon might be a zip code, but nobody lives there. So we're talking about the 983 where people live. More than half of all of our kids in poverty in Florida live in only 15% of our zip codes. So think of it this way, 150 zip codes out of our 983 is where more than half of our kids in poverty live. Now, every kid matters and every zip code matters. But I wanted to let you know this is very concentrated, and I really appreciate those of you who've taken this seriously and are going into those zip codes and setting up shop. 18% of our kids in Florida are living in poverty. Right here in this county, it's over 20%. You got about 45,000 kids in poverty right here in Duval. Remember that number because I'm going to show it to you in a few slides. I'm actually going to break down what's going on in Duval County. 45,000 kids in Duval County. Fundamental question I would ask you to go back home and start asking people for the next 6 months. Just ask the next 50 business leaders that you see, or your county commissioners. How many kids are living in poverty in our county? Folks, I did this in Palm Beach recently, and I was told we don't have any kids in my zip code living in poverty. Imagine the surprise when I pull up our gap map and show them how many kids are living in poverty in the zip code that they told me there were no kids living in poverty in. Half our job is awareness. People want to fix this. People want to do something. Look at the unemployment rate. Did you notice it's under 2.5% for the state? But inside those 150 zip codes, it's almost 7%. You saw earlier, we were the first group that was asked to come up to DC and testify in Congress about why does the business community care and what would we do about it. This very initiative, the Equality of Opportunity Initiative, was born out of all of that. We were working with the Federal Reserve, with United Way, with several other groups back then, talking about fiscal cliffs and what needed to be done. And so thank you to all of you who've been on that journey with us. This Equality of Opportunity Initiative, I know some of you serve on that advisory board, and I think we're looking for 8 or 9 more people to serve on our statewide advisory board to take this into every county and into every zip code in Florida in the rest of the year. Again, I want to just underscore these 2 goals at the end of the day, because there's so much good work going on in Florida. But one thing I want to ask you to do when you go back home is ask every nonprofit you work with and every C-suite leader that you know, what is our 3rd grade reading score and what are we doing about it? Who's the lead on that and how can I help? And how many kids are in poverty in my county? What about in my zip code? And what can we be doing about that? That's very much what this Solutions Summit is all about. I mentioned progress. So when we started this thing almost 10 years ago, we had over 950,000 kids in poverty in Florida. And those of you who know me well know I'm a huge advocate for accountability and a huge advocate for looking at the scoreboard. And if we're failing, we need to say we're failing why. If we're making progress, we need to say why and how do we make more of it. So the net effect of this chart you see here is that poverty is down. 194,000 fewer kids are in poverty today than when we started this, at a time when the rest of the country's going, most of the country's going the opposite way, right? We have 284,000 more to go, because remember our goal was to cut that 950,000 number in half by the time we get to 2030, which is why we really need you to engage in the zip code level initiatives. Okay. A few more data points I want to show you. And again, I told you at the beginning I was going to start up here and I was going to get very granular. And so now I just want you to let this sink in for a second. So the dark blue lines, or the dark blue charts, are the percentage of Floridians that are white, Hispanic, and black. That's Florida. So go with me left to right here for a minute. You see on the left side, about 51% of Floridians are white. But now let's go into those 150 zip codes where half of our kids are in poverty. You see the number there, right? You see how small the percentage is of people who are white who live in those zip codes. Okay? You can make your own value judgments for that, but that's what's going on in those zip codes. Look at our Hispanic numbers. Right? You can see that there's significantly more population of Hispanic in those 150 zip codes. But look at our black Floridians, 14% of the population, but over half of black Floridians in Florida live in those 150 zip codes, where half of our kids are in poverty. Okay? Why am I showing you this slide? You could take this slide a lot of different directions. I'm showing you this slide because what we want to do is we want to cut poverty in half for everybody in Florida, all 763,000 kids. And it doesn't matter what zip code they're in, and it doesn't matter if they were born into poverty, if it's a generational poverty issue or not. So we need to know what's going on. That was childhood poverty. Let me do it again for you in 3rd grade reading proficiency. So, statewide, 53% of our 3rd graders can read at or above grade level statewide. And I would ask you, I would dare you to go look up your county today while you're here. Go to the floridascorecard.org, look up your county, and you'll be able to find out in less than 30 seconds what's the percentage of your 3rd graders in your county reading at or above grade level. And then you can look just below it, the box below it will tell you how many kids does that represent. What would happen in your county if every time you went to a local chamber meeting like they do in Citrus County already, or an economic development meeting, or a United Way meeting, or a county commission meeting, or a city council meeting, or a legislative delegation meeting, What if on the agenda of every meeting was a reminder of how many of our third graders aren't reading at grade level, and let somebody talk that month about what are we doing about it? Now, I know some of you in your head are thinking, yeah, that would never happen. Isn't that awful? What can we do in the business community to simply report these numbers out so that the conversation can be, what can we do to get it to 100% by 2030? So check this out, left to right. Our black third graders in Florida, about 36% of our black third graders in Florida are reading at or above grade level. About 46% of our Hispanic third graders, about 65% of our white third graders, and you get into the mid-70s, 76% of our Asian third graders. Again, I share this number with you because our goal is that all of them, 100% of them, are reading at grade level by the time we get to 2030. All right. Now, the final few things I want to tell you, I want to get even more granular, right? I mentioned what would a physician do if you went in to see her and she said, what's going on, Mark? And we started the triage and finding out what needs to be done. And then she would come up with a protocol for me. You've heard about the 10 root causes of poverty. And this is, again, in concert with Federal Reserve, United Way, and so many others. This is the research we did years ago that said there's actually 10 things that can send every one of us into poverty, and they're the same 10 things that can keep us from getting out of poverty. And it's things like crime, things like childcare, things like I don't have any skills, I need to get skills, or maybe I have skills, but maybe there's not a job opportunity for those skills. Maybe I'm a registered nurse and I have all kinds of skills, but maybe the hospital's 16 miles away and I don't have any way to get there. So transportation issues become real. Maybe it's affordable workforce housing. There are 10 root causes. And that's all I want to say for now is just let that sink in. What we need to do is go into every zip code in Florida, all 983, and we need to say what's going on in each one of those zip codes. No two zip codes are alike. What's going on in that zip code? What are the 2 or 3 or 4 things that would change the game in that zip code? And how do we direct corporate resources and community and nonprofit and policy resources to go actually into that neighborhood and into that zip code and fundamentally bring economic opportunity to it where it's not going to exist if we don't? Now, I've got a couple of very detailed slides for you that I hope you will download later and check out. But here's an example in Duval County, just what happens if you only look at averages and big numbers. I mentioned, there were mid-40,000 children in poverty. You've got 34 zip codes in Duval County. My goal is that every one of you could do this back in your county in a week. 34 zip codes, 45,000 kids in poverty. In 7 of these 34 zip codes, more than half of all the kids in Duval County who live there are in poverty, right? Just be thinking about that. What about third grade reading scores, right? You can see how many kids we have at over 120 schools. Over half the kids who can't read in Duval County at third grade level are in just a third of your schools. So again, what if we could direct volunteer hours and philanthropy, and what if we could help the organizations that are actually doing something about that? But if you look at SNAP benefits, used to be called food stamp benefits, and you look at what the overall percentage is in the county, you can look at your 34 zip codes and you can say, wait, we have a couple of counties where those numbers are 2 or 3 times what the county average is. What if we went into those zip codes? So I don't want to pick on her, but Karen Moore is here, a board member of the Florida Chamber of Commerce, and back in Tallahassee, she heard there was a zip code 32304 that had more households in poverty than any other zip code in all of Florida. And remember, one of the root causes was food. So Karen's company figured out, what are we going to do about this? And I've lost track of the numbers, so forgive me, Karen. But her company, Moore, has donated 40 or 50,000 meals into that one zip code to try to help solve the food desert problem in that one zip code. That's the power of using data to say, where do we go and how do we go into a zip code and how do we figure out what to do in that zip code? I'm going to say this, and I know it's going to get me in trouble with somebody in the room. The business community is already writing enough checks. and the checks are already big enough. What I would suggest is we need to, instead of sending it all over the place, we need to say, wait, where is it actually needed, and who are the organizations that are going to bring the ROI to the equation, and what are the proven results? You're going to hear from 30 people or so today who are actually in the proven results business. And so I hope you'll bring some of these ideas right back home with you. Okay. In terms of now, I've told you about the Florida scorecard. The Florida Gap Map, again, first in the United States of its kind. And I'm not going to go through it in any detail, but I just want to walk you through what the power of the Florida Gap Map can do. Special kudos to Kyle Baltuck and Zanani and Dave and the whole team that's put this together. First of its kind, all 983 zip codes now have over 100 different metrics that you can go to. You literally can go to every zip code right this second, to floridagapmap.org. You can look at everything from childhood obesity rates to you can remember the 10 root causes I talked about? You can pull up health and you can see how many people have asthma, what about diabetes, what about mental health issues? And you can look for the anomalies and you can figure out where are we going into. So that's what the Gap Map looks like. Again, you can go right down to a zip code level. This slide simply represents those 10 root causes I was telling you about. If you want to figure out how to help with food, you can go find zip codes where food's needed. You can go right into that zip code and you can figure out what are the food metrics and where can I help out? Or if health is your deal, or if job training is your deal. I saw Marianne Sabalik is here, and I really appreciate the workforce group being here, Rick Beasley and others. I appreciate CareerSource and Workforce being here, because this is all interconnected when you think about it. Okay, finally, as just a brief word thanking all of you for what you've all been doing. We are getting all kinds of national and state publicity over this thing called the Florida model. Publications all over the country literally are talking about this. Florida Trend is a great partner of ours, and we appreciate what Vicki and Mark before her have done to raise awareness here. As a matter of fact, the National Association of Counties have their annual conference in Austin, Texas this year, and they've invited us. Kyle's actually going to be one of their keynote speakers to come share with all the counties in the United States this Florida model that's county and zip code specific, because our vision is we want Florida to be the leader, but this can be replicated everywhere across the United States. And that's actually beginning to happen later this year. This recognition that I talked about, you're going to hear from some of these people today and their organizations anyway, but Florida Blue was just featured on the front page in a big article in Florida Trend. A couple years ago, we had Lyft on the front cover talking about what could happen in Florida if we focus on neighborhoods. Tallahassee Chamber of Commerce is doing great work. You're going to hear from them in just a little bit. And then, of course, Broward College. Mildred's here to share what she and Greg are doing in Broward, right? So literally, the people that are getting all the recognition for this, they're here today. And they're going to be talking with you about what can we do to replicate this in every zip code statewide. Speaker of the House, Paul Renner, we've spent a lot of time together talking about a lot of things, but I think you would all be impressed and surprised at his personal interest in fiscal cliffs and his personal interest in figuring out what can the Florida legislature do. Some of this is federal, let's be honest about that, but some of it's state level. Paul Renner has a strong interest. You're going to hear later in some words from Paul Renner about this, but we've actually made some progress this year. And you're going to hear later in his message about what else can we do next year. What are the other fiscal cliffs that we can go attack next year? So progress is being made on this. And I would venture to say if we didn't have partners in the legislature, but I think more importantly, if we didn't have a business community that's thinking 5, 6, 10 years down the road, where we're actually pointing out, look, there are some problems that policy can fix. Now, I mentioned the zip code level initiative, and we also have a sister initiative called Promising Practices, which is what are you all doing that's working that we can replicate? If we're doing something in Citrus that can be replicated in Palm Beach, that can be replicated in Duval, we call that a promising practice. And you're going to hear a lot about that today. So the logos you see on the screen today are either zip code leaders or promising practice leaders that you're actually going to hear from today at this conference. Final slide I have for you is just a request, right? This is what the model looks like. We have a statewide advisory board that's looking at how do we bring equality of opportunity to every zip code, and how do we get 100% of our third graders reading at grade level. But I want you to think, just bear with me for a second and think through, what's your role in this? Could your organization, or could you personally, or do you know someone that would want to serve in one of these roles? Our vision is to have a county prosperity initiative in all 67 counties. And some of you, I keep picking on my friends at Citrus County, but there's a Citrus Prosperity Citrus, there's a Prosperity Broward, right? Imagine every county having a prosperity initiative. By the way, we're talking volunteers getting together to say, we're not going to accept this stuff anymore. We're all going to work together to get something done. This doesn't need to be some government program. There's a group of concerned people who get together and say, we're going to do it. Then imagine there's 983 zip codes. The model is, I need you to step up and say, my company will quarterback a zip code. We'll actually go get the 10 root cause leaders together, and we'll start having meetings, and we'll start using the gap map, and we'll start changing outcomes in our zip codes. Right now, we have 109 of you who stepped forward and said, I'll take a zip code. And this has happened in almost no time. So our vision over the next few years is that all zip codes have either a nonprofit or an individual or a company that says, we're going to adopt that zip code, and we're going to put the 10 root cause leaders together locally, so that, folks, this becomes a neighborhood zip code level solution. So listen, thanks for being here today. Thank you for bearing with me as I gave you that sort of 100,000 foot view all the way down to the zip code level view. I want to leave you with this thought, which is, we just no longer have an excuse to not make this our priority. And if you think about the open jobs that we have, and you think about bringing economic opportunity to every zip code, this literally is the model, and this is the answer. And the beauty of it is, nobody competes with anybody for this. We're literally all in this together. And so I'm going to be up on stage a few more times today. Listen, thank you all very much for being here. Thanks for helping us cut childhood poverty in half and bringing prosperity to zip codes where it's not going to be. Looking forward to the rest of the program. Thanks for being here.